Welcome to History Orbit, where the past isn't just a story, it's a pulse-pounding saga that grabs you by the soul and doesn't let go. Picture this, a world of shadowy castles where queens wielded power like a blade, their scandals lighting up the medieval night like wildfire. Tonight we're plunging into the lives of women who didn't just break the rules, they rewrote them in blood, wine and whispers. Paired with the untamed revelry of medieval Christmas and its Roman ancestor Saturnalia, where the world turned upside down and chaos wore a crown. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button to join our orbit through history's wildest tales, and drop a comment to tell us where you're watching from: London at midnight, Tokyo at dawn, or maybe a cozy couch in New York. Let's ignite this journey together, diving into a time when crowns were heavy, betrayals were sharp, and every feast was a gamble with fate. Imagine a Europe carved by ambition where stone fortresses stood against stormy skies. And queens like Joanna of Naples didn't just rule, they orchestrated symphonies of power and scandal. These women weren't content to sit in the shadows of kings, they built their own legends, often with a lover, a dagger, or a well-timed rumor. Tonight, we'll meet queens who turned courts into chessboards where every move was a risk, and every whisper could topple an empire. But it's not just about royal drama, we'll also uncover the raucous 12 days of Christmas, a festival of feasting, role reversal, and fire-lit madness rooted in the Roman Saturnalia, where slaves became kings and the world laughed at its own rules. These stories aren't just history, they're a mirror to the human spirit, bold, flawed, and unapologetic. Let's start with the medieval world itself, a tapestry of faith, fear, and raw ambition, where life was as fleeting as a candle's flame. Castles weren't just homes, they were fortresses of power, their halls echoing with the clink of goblets, the rustle of silk, and the hiss of secrets. Queens like Joanna, Eleanor, and others we'll meet tonight weren't just figureheads. They were architects of destiny, navigating a world where a single misstep could mean exile, execution, or a legacy etched in infamy. Their courts were stages where love, betrayal, and politics played out in equal measure, and every decision was a roll of the dice. To understand these women, we need to see their world, a place where faith was law, and the church's shadow loomed large. The medieval mind saw life as a battle between heaven and hell, with every act, from a queen's marriage to a peasant's prayer, weighed on divine scales. Yet, beneath the piety, there was a hunger for life, for power, for pleasure. And nowhere was this more vivid than in the courts of our queens. Joanna of Naples, crowned in 1343, didn't just wear her crown, she wielded it like a weapon. Her reign a masterclass in defiance. Born into a world that demanded obedience, she saw tradition as a challenge, not a chain. Her court in Naples was a glittering maze of intrigue, where allies could become enemies over a single feast, and loyalty was a currency more precious than gold. Joanna's story begins with her coronation, a moment that should have been a triumph, but was instead the opening act of a drama that would span decades. At 17, she was thrust onto a throne surrounded by vultures, nobles, and popes who saw a young queen as a pawn to be moved or removed. But Joanna wasn't one to be underestimated. Her first marriage to Andrew of Hungary was meant to secure alliances, but it ended in a scandal that set tongues wagging across Europe. Andrew was found hanging from a palace window in 1345, his death labelled an accident, though the court's whispers told a different story. Was it murder? A lover's quarrel gone wrong? Or just a tragic mishap? Joanna's silence only fueled the rumours. Her serene smile a mask that hid a mind sharper than any blade. The legend of her trapdoor bed, where unwanted suitors plummeted into the moat below, was likely a tale spun by rivals, but it clung to her like perfume. True or not, it painted a picture of a queen who played by her own rules. Her charm as dangerous as it was captivating. Joanna's reign wasn't just about scandal, though. She held Naples through wars, papal decrees, and relentless enemies, her elegance a shield against chaos. She married 3 more times, each husband a stepping stone to power, and each meeting a fate that raised eyebrows. Her second husband, Louis of Taranto, died under mysterious circumstances, and the third, James of Majorca, found himself sidelined as Joanna's ambitions outshone his. By her fourth marriage to Otto of Brunswick, she was a master of the political game. Who caught a stage where she directed every scene. Yet, her enemies never stopped circling. In 1382, she was strangled, likely by a rival or a betrayed ally, her death as dramatic as her life. Joanna's legacy wasn't just power, it was the audacity to live boldly in a world that demanded she kneel. Her story, like those of the queens we'll meet, is a thread in the tapestry of medieval life, woven with ambition, desire, and defiance. But what was life like beyond the throne? The medieval world wasn't just castles and crowns, it was a place where every day was a gamble with survival. For every queen plotting in her chambers, there were thousands of peasants toiling in fields, their lives tied to the seasons, the church, and the whims of their lords. The church was the heartbeat of this world, its bells marking time, its priests shaping thought. Sundays meant mass, where villagers gathered in stone churches, their breath visible in the winter air, listening to Latin they barely understood. Yet, faith wasn't just duty, it was a lifeline, a promise of salvation in a world where death could come from a bad harvest, a fever, or a bandit's blade. The nobility, meanwhile, lived in a different reality, their halls filled with tapestries, music, and the constant dance of power. A noblewoman's life was a delicate balance, expected to be pious, fertile, and silent, yet many, like our queens, refused to play that role. They were educated, often more so than their husbands, fluent in languages, poetry, and the art of influence. Their courts were battlegrounds of wit, where a well-placed word could shift alliances or spark wars. This was the world Joanna navigated, a world where a queen's beauty was a weapon, her marriage a treaty, and her scandals a legacy. But it wasn't all intrigue. The medieval year had moments of release, none more vibrant than the 12 days of Christmas. From December 25th to January 6th, Europe erupted in a festival that blended faith with frenzy, a time when the rigid order of society loosened and the air filled with song, wine, and laughter. This wasn't the Christmas of twinkling lights and gift wrap, it was a raw, chaotic celebration, rooted in the Roman Saturnalia where slaves mocked masters and the world embraced madness. Picture halls draped in holly and ivy, tables groaning under roasted boars and spiced wine, and a lord of misrule crowned to lead the chaos. These festivities weren't just parties, they were a pressure valve for a society bound by hierarchy and hardship. To understand our queens, we must see them against this backdrop. Women who thrived in a world that celebrated order but craved disorder. Joanna's Naples was no stranger to revelry, who caught a stage for feasts that rivaled Christmas itself, where wine flowed, and secrets spilled as freely as the music. But what drove a queen to scandal? Was it power, love, or simply the thrill of defying a world that sought to cage her? As we leave Joanna's sunlit court, we turn to another queen, one whose ambition burned even brighter, whose life was a rebellion against the constraints of her time. Her name was Eleanor of Aquitaine, and her story takes us from the dusty roads of the Crusades to the poetic halls of Poitiers, where love was both a game and a weapon. Let's follow her path, where every step was a challenge to the medieval order, and every choice a spark that lit up history. From the sun-scorched courts of Naples, where Joanna spun her web of charm and danger, we now ride north to the rolling hills of Aquitaine, where a queen named Eleanor redefined what it meant to rule, love, and rebel. Eleanor of Aquitaine wasn't just a queen, she was a force of nature, a woman whose wit was sharper than a knight's sword and whose ambition burned brighter than the torches in her halls. Born around 1122 into a world that prized piety and silence in women, Eleanor laughed at those expectations, crafting a legacy that would echo through centuries. Her story connects seamlessly to Joanna's, not just through their shared defiance but in how they turned the medieval world's constraints into stages for their own power. Where Joanna wielded scandal like a scepter, Eleanor played a longer game, one that stretched from the holy sands of the Crusades to the poetic courts of Poitiers, where love was both a weapon and a muse. Let's step into her world, a tapestry of faith, war, and forbidden desires, where every choice she made sent ripples across Europe. Eleanor's journey began in the lush duchy of Aquitaine, a land of vineyards and troubadours, where she inherited wealth and a spirit as untamed as the rivers that carved her homeland. At 15, she married Louis VII of France, a match meant to bind Aquitaine's riches to the French crown. Louis was devout, awkward, and more suited to a monastery than a marriage bed. His piety a stark contrast to Eleanor's vibrant energy. She was a whirlwind of charisma, fluent in Latin, skilled in riding, and with a mind that danced circles around the dour French court. Their marriage was a mismatch from the start, like pairing a falcon with a cloistered monk. Louis wanted a queen to pray beside him, Eleanor wanted a stage to shine. The tension only grew when Louis dragged her on the Second Crusade in 1147, a grueling trek to the Holy Land that was less a holy pilgrimage and more a test of endurance. Picture Eleanor, draped in fine silks, riding through deserts with musicians in tow, while Louis clutched relics and muttered prayers. Rumors swirled that she grew too close to her uncle, Raymond of Antioch, a charming prince whose company she preferred over her husband's. The whispers were likely exaggerated, but they stung Louis, whose frown deepened with every mile. By the time they returned, their marriage was a husk, dissolving over a tense supper in Damascus. Eleanor didn't linger in defeat. She annulled the marriage, citing consanguinity, a convenient excuse that freed her to reclaim Aquitaine and her future. In 1152, she married Henry Plantagenet, soon to be Henry II of England, a red-haired firebrand 11 years her junior. This was no political pawn. Henry was her equal in ambition, his temper as fierce as her intellect. Their union was a storm producing 10 children, vast territories, and a household that crackled with passion and conflict. Eleanor wasn't content to be a silent consort, she shaped Henry's court, her influence seeping into every decision, from diplomacy to war. Together, they forged an empire stretching from Scotland to the Pyrenees. But their marriage was a battlefield, love and rivalry intertwined. Eleanor's court in Poitiers became a beacon of culture, a place where troubadours sang of courtly love, a new ideal that celebrated adoration from afar, though in practice, it was anything but chaste. Imagine her halls, lit by flickering candles where knights penned sonnets to noble women, their words dripping with longing, while Eleanor presided like a queen of hearts. She championed poets, hosted contests, and turned love into an art form, a game where desire was currency and loyalty was optional. Her court was a magnet for nobles with more passion than restraint, their stolen glances and whispered promises weaving a web of intrigue. But Eleanor's ambitions went beyond poetry. She raised her sons to be kings, planting seeds of power that would one day turn against her husband. When Henry's affairs grew blatant, Eleanor didn't weep, she plotted. In 1173, she backed her sons' rebellion against their father, a bold move that shook England's foundations. Henry, betrayed, placed her under house arrest for 16 years, but even confined, Eleanor was never powerless. She wrote letters, shaped alliances, and waited, her mind as sharp as ever. Her imprisonment was less a cage and more a stage for her resilience, her spirit unbroken by stone walls or passing years. Released after Henry's death in 1189, Eleanor ruled as regent for her son Richard the Lionheart, proving her political genius. She negotiated his ransom when he was captured, secured his throne, and outlived most of her enemies, dying in 1204 at 82, a legend who had reshaped to kingdoms. Eleanor's life was a masterclass in power, her scandals not just gossip but proof of a woman who refused to be tamed. Her courtly love movement wasn't just romance. It was a rebellion against a world that demanded women be silent. To understand Eleanor, we must see her against the backdrop of her time, a world where the church's grip was iron, yet cracks of defiance appeared in the form of feasts and festivals. The 12 days of Christmas, which we'll explore later, were a mirror to her spirit, a time when rules bent and the world embraced chaos. Picture her at a Christmas feast, her laughter mingling with the clatter of goblets, her eyes catching every whispered plot. These celebrations, rooted in the Roman Saturnalia, were more than parties. They were a release for a society bound by hierarchy, much like Eleanor's own defiance was a release from the constraints of her role. Her story connects to Joanna's through their shared audacity, both queens navigating courts where betrayal was as common as bread. But where Joanna's scandals were personal, Eleanor's were political. Her life a chess game played across continents. The medieval world she inhabited was a paradox, a place of rigid order and wild excess. Beyond the courts, life was harsh. Peasants toiled under the weight of feudal dues, their days marked by labor and prayer. The church was their anchor, its rituals a rhythm to their lives, yet it was also a judge, quick to condemn those who strayed. Noble women like Eleanor faced different chains, expected to be chaste, obedient and fertile. Yet she broke every mold, her education and charisma making her a threat to men who underestimated her. Her court in Poitiers wasn't just a cultural hub, it was a statement, a declaration that women could wield power through words and ideas. The troubadours who sang her praises weren't just poets, they were her army. Their verses a weapon against a world that sought to silence her. Eleanor's life was a tapestry of triumphs and trials, each thread a story of defiance. Her marriages were strategic, her children a legacy, but her scandals were her signature, proof that she lived on her terms. The rumors of her crusade flirtations, the rebellion against Henry, the poetic court that scandalized the pious, all painted her as a woman who didn't just play the game but changed its rules. Her imprisonment could have broken her, but instead it sharpened her, turning her into a symbol of endurance. When she emerged, she didn't just reclaim her place, she redefined it, ruling as regent with a wisdom that silenced her critics. Eleanor's story is a bridge to the broader medieval world, where power was a dance of alliances and betrayals. Her life intersected with the great events of her time, the Crusades, the rise of the Plantagenet dynasty, the clash between church and crown. Yet, she was more than a player in these events, she was a catalyst. Her choices shaping history's course. To see her fully, we must look beyond the throne to the people who sustained her world, the peasants, knights, and midwives who lived in the shadow of her glory. Midwives, in particular, were the unsung heroes of this era, their hands guiding life into being while queens like Eleanor shaped empires. Their stories, though less documented, were no less vital. Their courage a quiet counterpoint to the loud dramas of the court. As we leave Eleanor's world of poetry and rebellion, we turn to a darker tale, one of a queen whose scandals weren't born of ambition but of desire. Margot of Bourgogne, trapped in a loveless marriage, sought passion in a riverside tower. Her story a stark reminder that even queens couldn't escape the consequences of their hearts. Let's step into her shadowed court, where a single misstep turned whispers into a scandal that shook France. As we leave Eleanor's poetic halls in Poitiers, where love was a game and rebellion a legacy, we cross the misty rivers of France to a shadowed tower by the Seine, where a queen named Margot of Bourgogne learned that even royal hearts could not outrun scandal. Margot's story weaves tightly into the tapestry of our medieval queens, her life a stark contrast to Eleanor's calculated defiance, yet bound by the same threads of desire and danger that defined their era. Where Eleanor shaped empires with her wit, Margot sought solace in forbidden passion, her choices sparking a fire that consumed her crown and her freedom. Her tale, set in the early 14th century, is a haunting reminder that in the medieval world, a queen's misstep could echo louder than her triumphs. Let's step into her court, a place of velvet gowns and whispered secrets, where a single night in a riverside tower unraveled a dynasty's honor. Margot of Bourgogne entered history as a model queen, born into a noble bloodline, married to the heir of France, Louis, the future Louis X, and draped in the elegance expected of royalty. Her marriage, sealed in 1305, was a diplomatic knot, tying Burgundy's wealth to the French throne. Louis was no romantic hero, his charm as bland as the porridge served in lesser halls, his interests fixed on tax ledgers and court protocol rather than his radiant bride. Margot, young and spirited, found herself in a gilded cage, her days filled with needlework, songs, and a stifling expectation to produce an heir without complaint. The French court was a labyrinth of etiquette, where every glance was scrutinized, and every word carried weight. Margot played her role well, her fur-trimmed gowns a symbol of her status, her smile a shield against the monotony of her marriage. Yet, beneath a polished exterior, a restlessness stirred, a hunger for something more than the cold routine of royal duty. The court buzzed with whispers of other queens like Eleanor, whose boldness had reshaped kingdoms, or Joanna, whose scandals lit up Naples like a comet. Margot, though, sought not power but passion, a spark to warm the chill of her lover's bed. Her story might have remained unremarkable, a footnote in France's history, had it not been for the year 1314, when boredom and desire collided in a scandal that shook the Capetian dynasty. The Tordesillas affair, as it came to be known, was less a plot and more a reckless escape, born in the quiet moments when Margot and her sister-in-law, Blanche, found themselves unsupervised in the sprawling palace. The two women, bound by shared youth and stifled dreams, sought refuge in a royal tower by the Seine, a stone sentinel that promised privacy under its haunted eaves. Here, far from the prying eyes of courtiers, they met Norman knights, Philip and Gautier d'Aulnay, whose charm was as dangerous as their swords. The knights were everything Louis was not: bold, handsome, and reckless. Their laughter a bond to Margot's weary heart. What began as stolen glances soon became clandestine meetings, the tower's walls guarding their whispers and more. The Seine flowed silently below, its waters carrying no tales. But the tower's servants were less discreet. The affair might have remained a secret, a fleeting rebellion against a dull marriage, had it not been for a detail so mundane it borders on absurd: pillowcases. Royal linens embroidered with the fleur-de-lis were a mark of privilege, and when servants noticed identical patterns in the knights' quarters, the court's gossip mill began to grind. The discovery was a spark in a dry forest, igniting a scandal that reached the ears of King Philip IV, Margot's father-in-law, a monarch whose temper was as cold as his justice was swift. Philip, known as the Fair for his looks, not his mercy, saw the affair not as a personal failing, but as a stain on France's honor. The knights were seized, their tongues loosened by torture, their confessions a noose around Margot's neck. The court, once a stage for her grace, became a tribunal, its nobles whispering behind jeweled hands. Philip's wrath was unrelenting. The knights were executed in a public spectacle, their deaths a warning to any who dared defy the crown. Margot and Blanche faced a harsher fate, not death, but disgrace. Margot was stripped of her titles, her gowns replaced by coarse wool, and imprisoned in the fortress of Chateau Gaillard, a grim pile of stone perched above the Seine. The castle, once a symbol of royal might, became her tomb, its damp walls and howling winds her only companions. She died there in 1315. Barely 2 years later, her death shrouded in mystery. Some say illness claimed her, others whisper of suffocation. A quiet end ordered by a husband eager to erase his shame before taking the throne. The truth, like so much in medieval history, is lost to the shadows, but Margot's story endures. A cautionary tale of a queen who sought love in a world that prized duty above all. The Tordesillas scandal wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was a mirror to the medieval world's contradictions, a place where piety clashed with passion, and honor was both a shield and a shackle. Margot's fall connects to Eleanor's rebellion, not through ambition, but through the shared struggle to carve out a space for themselves in a world that demanded they be silent. Eleanor's courtly love was a controlled fire, Margot's affair a blaze that consumed her. Both women, though, defied the roles thrust upon them, their scandals a testament to their humanity in a world that saw queens as symbols, not souls. To understand Margot, we must see her against the backdrop of her time, a France where the church's bells tolled daily, and the king's word was law. The court was a stage, its players bound by rules unwritten but unbreakable. Yet Margot's story shows how fragile those rules could be. A single pillowcase, a servant's glance, could unravel a queen's life, proof that even the mighty were vulnerable to chance. Beyond the palace, life was no less precarious. Peasants lived by the rhythm of seasons, their survival tied to harvests and lords who ruled with iron fists. The church offered solace, its rituals a promise of eternity, but it also judged, its priests quick to condemn sins real or imagined. Noble women like Margot faced their own trials, their value measured in alliances and heirs, their desires a luxury few could afford. Margot's scandal wasn't unique, but its consequences were. A reminder that queens were both privileged and prisoner to their crowns. The Tordesillas affair also reveals the medieval obsession with honor, a currency more valuable than gold. Philip IV's response wasn't just about punishing Margot. It was about restoring the crown's sanctity, a task that demanded blood and banishment. The knights' execution was a spectacle, their bodies broken to appease a court that thrived on displays of power. Margot's imprisonment, though, was a quieter cruelty, her isolation a punishment worse than death in a world where status was everything. Her story echoes Joanna's, whose husbands met suspicious ends, and Eleanor's, whose rebellion cost her freedom. Yet Margot's scandal was less about power and more about the heart, a fleeting pursuit of joy that ended in chains. The medieval world Margot inhabited was a place of stark contrasts where feasts followed famines, and faith coexisted with fear. The 12 days of Christmas, which we'll delve into later, were a vivid expression of this duality, a time when the rigid order of society gave way to revelry, much like Margot's brief escape in the tower. Picture her, before her fall, at a Christmas banquet, her laughter mingling with the clink of goblets, her eyes catching the knights across a crowded hall. These festivities, rooted in the Roman Saturnalia, were a release for a world bound by duty, a moment when Eving queens could dream of freedom. Margot's story, though tragic, is a window into this world where every act was watched, and every choice carried weight. Her affair wasn't just a scandal, it was a rebellion, however brief, against a life that offered little joy. The tower by the Seine, with its stone walls and secret knights, was her portieres, a place where she could be more than a queen, if only for a moment. As we leave Margot's shadowed cell, we turn to a broader stage, the vibrant chaos of the medieval Christmas itself, a festival that mirrored the Queen's defiance in its embrace of disorder. From December 25th to January 6th, Europe erupted in a celebration that blended faith with frenzy. Its roots in the Roman Saturnalia are a testament to humanity's need for release. Let's step into this world of fire-lit halls and masked revels, where the spirit of rebellion lived not in a tower but in every song, dance, and cup of spiced wine. From the cold stone walls of Margot's prison, where whispers of scandal lingered like frost, we step into the warm, chaotic glow of the medieval 12 days of Christmas, a festival that pulsed through the heart of Europe, binding queens like Margot, Eleanor, and Joanna to the humblest villagers in a shared dance of revelry and release. Margot's tale showed us a queen undone by her heart's rebellion, a fleeting escape from the rigid order of her world. And now we turn to a time when that order itself was turned upside down, when the medieval world embraced chaos with open arms. The 12 days of Christmas, stretching from December 25th to January 6th, were more than a holiday. They were a defiant celebration of life, a moment when the strict hierarchy of lords, priests, and peasants bent under the weight of laughter, wine, and firelit madness. Rooted in the ancient Roman Saturnalia, this festival carried echoes of a time when slaves mocked masters and the world laughed at its own rules, a spirit that resonated with the queens we've met, each of whom defied convention in her own way. Picture a medieval village, its thatched roofs dusted with snow, the air thick with the scent of pine and roasting meat, as communities gathered to feast, sing, and forget, if only for a moment, the hardships of their lives. Let's dive into this vibrant world where the sacred met the wild, and every cup raised was a toast to survival. The 12 days of Christmas were a cornerstone of medieval life, a sacred pause in a world governed by labor and prayer. From the moment the Christ Mass bells rang on Christmas Day, Europe transformed, its people stepping into a season where the divine and the disorderly danced together. The Church, ever the arbiter of medieval life, framed these days as a celebration of Christ's birth. But the roots of the festival reached deeper into the Roman Saturnalia, a week-long revelry from December 17th that honored Saturn, the god of time and harvest. In Rome, Saturnalia was a time of inversion where masters served slaves, gambling was permitted, and a mock king, the Saturnalicious princeps, led absurd rituals with a grin. Gifts of candles, figs, and clay dolls filled homes, and cries of Io Saturnalia echoed through the streets. When Christianity spread, the Church wove these pagan threads into its own tapestry, turning Saturnalia's chaos into the 12 days, a blend of solemn masses and unbridled joy. In medieval Europe, this festival was a lifeline, a break from the grind of ploughing fields or serving lords, a chance to eat, drink, and dream of a better world. Villages came alive with preparations weeks in advance. Women kneaded dough for spiced breads. Men hauled massive Yule logs to burn through the season, their flames a symbol of warmth against the winter's bite. Homes were adorned with holly, ivy, and mistletoe, not for decoration alone, but for their ancient magic, believed to ward off spirits and bring luck. The Church blessed these customs, though its priests eyed the rowdier traditions with suspicion, torn between control and the need to let the people breathe. The heart of the 12 days was the feast, a table groaning under the weight of roasted boar swans, and pies stuffed with fruits and spices. In wealthier halls, like those of Joanna or Eleanor, feasts were spectacles, with minstrels strumming lutes and servants bearing platters of peacock, its feathers reattached for grandeur. Spiced wine, called hypocras, flowed freely, its warmth loosening tongues and inhibitions. Peasants, too, shared in the bounty, their tables simpler but no less joyful, with ale and coarse bread shared among neighbours. The lord of misrule, a peasant or low-born servant crowned for the season, was the festival's wild card, a nod to Saturnalia's mock king. This figure, often a jester or village wit, led the community in absurd decrees, mock trials, and dances that mocked the nobility's pomp. In one village, he might demand lords sweep the stables. In another, he'd lead a procession of drunken carolers, demanding ale at every door. These carols weren't the gentle hymns of today, but boisterous songs, sometimes bawdy, sometimes sacred, their verses a mix of Latin and local tongues. Mummers' plays, another staple, brought stories to life, with masked performers acting out tales of St. George or local legends, their antics drawing roars of laughter from frost-bitten crowds. The church, wary of such excess, tried to steer the festival toward piety, with masses for St. Stephen, St. John, and the Holy Innocents punctuating the days. But the people's hunger for joy often drowned out the sermons. The Feast of Fools, held around January 1st, was the pinnacle of this chaos, where clergy donned animal masks, danced in cathedrals, and sang mocking hymns, a rare moment when even priests embraced the absurd. This inversion mirrored the Queen's own rebellions, Joanna's deadly charm, Eleanor's poetic defiance, Margot's forbidden love, each a challenge to the order that bound them. The 12 days were a safety valve, a time when society could bend without breaking, allowing peasants to mock their lords and queens to loosen their cassettes, if only for a night. In castles, the festivities were no less wild. Eleanor court in Poitiers might have hosted a Christmas banquet where troubadours sang of love while knights vied for favour, their flirtations a nod to the courtly love she championed. Joanna's Naples, with its sunlit halls, likely saw feasts where wine and secrets flowed in equal measure, her laughter masking the plots that swirled around her. Even Margot, before her fall, might have stood at a Christmas table, her eyes catching a knight's across the flickering candles, a moment of freedom before the tower's shadow claimed her. These queens, though bound by duty, were part of this festive world, their scandals and triumphs woven into the same human need for release that drove the 12 days. Beyond the feasts, the festival was a time of rituals that bridged the sacred and the mundane. Warsailing, a tradition in England, saw villagers parade to orchards, singing to apple trees to ensure a good harvest, their voices mingling with the clink of cider mugs. In colder regions, bonfires lit the night, their flames a defiance of winter's grip, while children ran through villages, their faces smudged with soot, demanding treats or coins. The Yule log, a massive trunk burned for days, was a focal point, its ashes kept as charms against misfortune. These customs, rooted in pagan beliefs, were tolerated by the church, which saw their value in binding communities together. Yet, not all was joy. The 12 days also carried a darker edge, with tales of spirits and omens lurking in the winter dark. Villagers whispered of the wild hunt, a spectral procession led by ghostly riders, said to sweep through the skies, snatching souls who lingered too long outdoors. Such stories, half believed, added a thrill to the festivities, a reminder that even in celebration, the medieval world was never far from fear. The 12 days also highlighted the role of women, not just queens but the unsung figures who kept the festival alive. Women spun wool for costumes, baked breads for feasts, and sang lullabies to children caught up in the chaos. Their labor was the backbone of the celebration, yet their stories, like those of midwives we'll meet later, were rarely recorded, their voices drowned out by the clamor of lords and priests. The festival spirit, though, was universal, from the humblest cottage to the grandest hall. It was a time when the medieval world could breathe, laugh, and dream. The Saturnalia roots of the 12 days gave it a unique flavor, a memory of a time when Rome's rigid order gave way to freedom, a legacy that lived on in every mock king and raucous song. This connection to antiquity wasn't lost on the medieval mind. Scholars in monasteries pored over Roman texts, while peasants unknowingly echoed ancient rites in their dances. The Church, ever pragmatic, embraced these traditions, weaving them into Christian narratives. But the wild heart of Saturnalia beat on, a pulse that linked the Queen's defiance to the people's revelry. As we stand in these firelit halls, surrounded by the clatter of feasts and the echo of carols, we see a world that celebrated life in all its messiness. Much like the queens who dared to live boldly, the 12 days were a mirror to their stories, a time when rules could bend and passion could flare, if only for a moment. Yet, beneath the laughter, there was labor, the work of those who made life possible, the midwives who brought new souls into this chaotic world. Their hands, steady and skilled, were as vital as any queen's scepter, their stories a quiet counterpoint to the scandals and songs. Let's turn now to these women, whose courage in the birthing chamber shaped the medieval world as surely as any crown. Their lives a testament to the strength that thrived in the shadows of power. As we step away from the firelit halls of the 12 days of Christmas where laughter and chaos drowned out the winter's chill, we enter a quieter, more intimate world. The birthing chambers, where medieval midwives worked miracles with steady hands and whispered prayers. These women, often invisible in the chronicles that celebrated queens like Joanna, Eleanor, and Margot, were the unsung heroes of their time, their courage a vital thread in the tapestry of medieval life. The revelry of Christmas with its mock kings and spiced wine was a fleeting escape from a world where survival was a daily gamble, and nowhere was this more evident than in the act of birth, where midwives held the balance between life and death. Their story connects to our queens not through scandal or power, but through the shared strength of women who defied the limits of their roles. Their quiet triumphs a counterpoint to the loud dramas of courts and feasts. Picture a candlelit room, its air heavy with the scent of herbs and the cries of a laboring mother, where a midwife's skill was the only shield against fate. Let's walk into this world where every birth was a battlefield, and every life saved a victory as profound as any won by a queen. In the medieval world, childbirth was a perilous journey, a moment when the veil between life and death grew thin. Women faced it with courage, but their survival often rested in the hands of midwives, who were neither noble nor learned by the standards of monks or scholars, yet possessed a wisdom born of experience. These women, often older, widowed, or childless themselves, were the guardians of life, called to cottages and castles alike when the pains began. They carried bags of linen, yarrow, and sage, their tools as simple as their knowledge was profound. In a time when medicine was a mix of prayer, superstition, and trial, midwives blended all three, their chants as vital as their herbs. A mother in labor might be given a drink of wine mixed with fennel to ease her pain, or a charm of amber placed near her heart to ward off evil spirits. The Church, ever watchful, blessed some of these practices but frowned on others, labeling midwives witches if a birth went wrong. Yet, no village or court could function without them, their presence a necessity in a world where every child was a gamble with God. Midwives worked in the shadows, their names rarely recorded. There lives a mystery beyond the birthing room. They were women like Agnes, a fictional name for a real figure, who might have tended to a peasant's wife in a muddy village or slipped into Eleanor, Portia's court to deliver a royal heir. Agnes would have known the smell of straw and sweat, the feel of a mother's trembling hand, the weight of a community's hopes resting on her shoulders. Her day began before dawn, summoned by a frantic husband or a servant's knock. Her path lit only by a lantern's flicker. She'd arrived to find a room of women, mothers, sisters, aunts, gathered in a circle of support, their voices low to keep men and spirits at bay. The birthing chamber was a woman's domain, a rare space where men, even priests, held no sway. Here, Agnes would kneel, her hands steady as she guided the mother through hours of pain. Her words a lifeline in the dark. If the child came quickly, she'd swaddle it in linen, offering thanks to the Virgin Mary. If the labor stalled, she'd turn to her bag, pulling out herbs or a prayer, her calm masking the fear that haunted every birth. The medieval world saw childbirth as a divine test, a woman's duty to God and husband, but also a danger that claimed countless lives. A third of infants died before their first year, and mothers often followed, their bodies worn by fever or bleeding. Midwives like Agnes fought these odds with little more than their wits, their hands stained with blood and hope. They knew which herbs could coax the sluggish labor, which prayers might soothe the mother's fear, and when to act fast if a child emerged feet first. In dire cases, they performed baptisms themselves, splashing wine or water on a fading infant to save its soul before it slipped away. This act, though sacred, could draw the church's wrath, for only priests were meant to wield such power. Yet, midwives persisted, their role too vital to be bound by rules. Their work wasn't just physical, it was emotional, forging bonds between women in a world that often pitted them against each other. In the birthing room, a peasant's wife and a queen's lady-in-waiting were equals, united by pain and hope. These moments of solidarity echoed the defiance of our queens, Joanna's charm, Eleanor's wit, Margot's passion, all rooted in a refusal to be defined by their world's limits. Midwives, though, faced a different kind of scrutiny, their successes celebrated quietly, their failures branded as witchcraft. A stillbirth could spark whispers, a mother's death could lead to exile or worse. In 14th century England, a midwife named Margaret was accused of sorcery when a noblewoman died, her herbs deemed potions, her prayers curses. Such stories were common, a reminder that midwives walked a knife's edge, their skill both revered and feared. Yet, they continued, driven by necessity and a quiet pride in their craft. Their knowledge was passed down through generations, not in books but in whispered lessons, mother to daughter, aunt to niece. A midwife might teach her apprentice to feel for a child's position, to brew a tea of raspberry leaf to strengthen a mother, or to sing a hymn to calm a room's panic. These lessons were a legacy as enduring as any queen's, though rarely sung by troubadours. In castles, midwives served queens like Eleanor, whose 10 children were a testament to their skill. Imagine a midwife in Poitiers, summoned to Eleanor's side as she labored with Richard the Lionheart, her hands steady despite the weight of a kingdom's hopes. The room would be grander than a peasant's hut, its walls hung with tapestries, its air thick with incense, but the act of birth was the same, raw, uncertain, human. The midwife's role was to bridge this divide, to bring the same care to a queen as to a villager. Her hands are constant in a world of flux. These women were also keepers of secrets. They knew which noblewoman bore a child out of wedlock, which knight's heir was not his own, their silence a shield for the vulnerable. This discretion linked them to queens like Margot, whose tower scandal might have been whispered to a midwife before it reached the court. The 12 days of Christmas, with its feasts and chaos, were a backdrop to their work, for births did not pause for holidays. A midwife might leave a village wassail to tend a laboring mother, her lantern cutting through the snow as carols faded behind her. These festivals, with their Saturnalia roots, celebrated life's wildness, a spirit midwives embodied in their fight to bring new souls into the world. Their courage was a quiet rebellion, a refusal to let death win. Much like Joanna's defiance of her enemies or Eleanor's challenge to her husband's rule, the medieval world they inhabited was a place of stark contrasts, where faith and fear walked hand in hand. The church shaped every aspect of life, its bells marking hours, its priests preaching salvation. Yet midwives often stood apart, their practices blending Christian prayers with order. Earthier rites. A midwife might place a saint's relic near a mother's bed, but also burn sage to cleanse the air, a nod to traditions older than the church itself. This duality mirrored the 12 days, where sacred masses coexisted with pagan revelry. A balance midwives navigated with care. Their role was also economic. In villages, they were paid in bread, ale, or cloth, their services a barter for survival. In courts, they might receive a coin or a bolt of silk, but their reward was often the gratitude of a mother's smile or a child's first cry. These moments were their legacy, a quiet power that shaped generations. The midwife's story is a bridge to the broader medieval world, where every life was a thread in a fragile tapestry. They connected the queen's scandals to the people's struggles, their hands as vital to history as any crown or sword. As we leave their candlelit chambers where life and death hung in the balance, we turn to the legacy of these queens and midwives, a final reflection on how their defiance, whether loud or quiet, wove a story that still captivates us today. Let's gather these threads from Joanna's deadly charm to the midwife's steady hands, and see how they shaped a world that echoes in our own. as we leave the candlelit birthing chambers where midwives wove miracles with herbs and prayers, we step into the wider medieval world, a sprawling mosaic of fields, castles, and churches that shaped the lives of queens, revelers, and the unsung alike. The midwife's quiet courage was a thread in this tapestry, just as vital as Joanna's cunning, Eleanor's wit, or Margot's passion, each a defiance of the rigid order that bound their era. But to truly understand these women, we must walk the muddy paths of villages, ride with knights through shadowed forests, and kneel in stone churches where faith and fear collided. This world was the stage for our Queen's scandals, the 12 days of Christmas revelry, and the midwife's triumphs, a place where every soul, from peasant to noble, played a role in history's drama. Picture a medieval morning, the air sharp with frost as a peasant rises to feed pigs, a knight sharpens his blade, and a queen like Eleanor pens a letter that could shift a kingdom's fate. Let's wander through this world where survival was a daily act of will, and every life was a story waiting to be told. The medieval landscape was a patchwork of contrasts, golden fields under stormy skies, towering cathedrals beside crumbling hovels, a world where beauty and brutality were neighbors. Peasants who made up most of Europe's souls lived by the rhythm of the seasons, their hands calloused from ploughing fields or weaving cloth. A farmer like Thomas, a name for countless men, woke before dawn, his breath visible in the cold, to tend crops that fed both his family and his lord's table. His life was tied to the land, his taxes paid in grain or labor, his days punctuated by the church's bells calling him to prayer. The church was the heartbeat of his world, its stone walls a refuge from hunger and war, its priests promising salvation in exchange for obedience. Yet life was precarious. A bad harvest could mean starvation, a raid could burn his village to ash. Thomas's wife, perhaps a woman like the midwives we met, spun wool or brewed ale, her work as vital as his, though rarely praised. Their children, if they survived infancy, joined the labor early, hauling water or chasing stray lambs, their laughter a rare gift in a world of toil. Above the peasants stood the knights, men like Sir Robert, whose lives were forged in combat and loyalty. Clad in chainmail, they rode under banners of lions or crosses, sworn to lords who granted them land for service. Knighthood was no fairy tale, it was a brutal trade where honor was earned in blood. Robert might train in a castle's yard, his sword clashing against a squire's, or ride out to settle a dispute over stolen cattle, his presence a reminder of his lord's power. Yet, knights were also players in the courts of queens like Joanna or Eleanor, their odes of chivalry often tested by the temptations of courtly love. In Eleanor's Portiers, a knight might pen a poem to a lady, his words a delicate dance around desire, while in Joanna's Naples, he might whisper secrets that could topple a rival. These men were both protectors and pawns, their loyalty a currency as fragile as Margot's pillowcases, which betrayed her in the Tour de Seine. The courts where knights and queens mingled were stages of power, where every gesture was a move in a grand game. Castles, like those in Naples or Aquitaine, were not just homes but fortresses, their walls scarred by sieges, their halls alive with music and intrigue. A queen's day might begin with a mass, her knees on cold stone, but end with a feast where wine loosened tongues and alliances shifted. Joanna navigated this world with a smile that hid daggers, her marriages a chessboard where every husband was a piece to be played or sacrificed. Eleanor, with her sharp mind, turned Portiers into a cultural beacon, her court a place where knights and poets blurred the line between loyalty and love. Margot, less fortunate, found her escape in a tower, her brief rebellion a spark that burned her life to ash. These queens, though exalted, were bound by the same forces that shaped peasants and knights. The church's iron grip, the weight of duty, the pull of desire. The church was the medieval world's compass, its cathedrals soaring symbols of God's glory, its priests the arbiters of right and wrong. Every village had its church, every castle its chapel, where masses were sung in Latin, a language few understood but all revered. Priests preached of sin and salvation, their words a guide for souls like Thomas, who prayed for a good harvest, or Robert, who sought forgiveness for blood spilled in battle. Yet, the church was also a power, its popes and bishops rivaling kings in influence. Joanna clashed with popes over her throne, her charm a weapon against their decrees. Eleanor, during the Crusades, saw the Church's mightless hand. It's called a holy war of force that could unite or divide kingdoms. Even midwives, with their herbs and prayers, walked a fine line. Their rituals a blend of faith and older magic that priests eyed with suspicion. This tension between piety and practicality was a thread through all our stories, from the Queen's scandals to the Christmas feasts. The 12 days of Christmas, with their Saturnalia roots, were a release from this tension. A time when the Church's rule softened and the world embraced chaos. Peasants like Thomas joined wassailing bands, singing to orchards under starry skies, their voices mingling with the crackle of bonfires. Knights like Robert might lead a mummers' play, their faces masked as they mocked their lords. A rare chance to laugh at power. Queens, too, joined the revelry, Eleanor's court hosting poets who sang of love. Joanna's feasts a stage for her charisma. These moments of joy were fleeting, but they bound the medieval world together, a shared breath before the grind of life resumed. Midwives, too, were part of this cycle, their work uninterrupted by feasts, their hands delivering life as carols echoed outside. Their courage, like that of our queens, was a form of defiance, a refusal to bow to a world that often dismissed them. The medieval world was a place of hierarchies where lords ruled peasants, knights served lords, and queens balanced power with peril. Yet, it was also a world of connections where a peasant's labor fed a knight's table. A knight's sword protected a queen's throne, and a midwife's skill ensured the next generation. Joanna's Naples, with its sunlit intrigues, was built on the backs of peasants who tilled its fields. Eleanor's empire, stretching from England to Aquitaine, relied on knights who enforced her will. Margot's scandal, though personal, shook a dynasty that rested on the loyalty of men like Robert and the silence of women, like Agnes the midwife. These lives, though separated by status, were intertwined, each a spark in the medieval fire. The world they shared was also one of beauty, where art and faith collided in illuminated manuscripts, their gold leaf glowing like the Yule logs of Christmas. Cathedrals rose with arches that seemed to touch the heavens, their stained glass telling stories of saints and kings. Music, too, was a thread, from the chants of monks to the bawdy songs of carolers, a sound that linked village to court. Troubadours, inspired by Eleanor's courtly love, sang of passion that echoed Margot's fatal desire, their melodies a bridge between the sacred and the profane. This world was not static, it was alive with change, from the crusades that drew knights like Robert to the Holy Land, to the trade routes that brought spices to Joanna's feasts. Yet, change came at a cost. Wars left fields fallow, plagues swept villages, and scandals like Margot's could topple dynasties. The medieval world was a balance of order and chaos, a dance our queens and midwives knew well. Joanna's reign, with its deadly marriages, was a masterclass in navigating chaos. Eleanor's rebellion, born of ambition, reshaped kingdoms. Margot's affair, a moment of weakness, exposed the fragility of honor. Midwives, with their steady hands, brought order to the chaos of birth. Their work a quiet defiance of death. The 12 days of Christmas, with its laughter and inversion, was a microcosm of this balance, a time when the world could dream of freedom before returning to its chains. As we walk through this world, we see not just the scandals and feasts, but the people who made them possible, the peasants who fed them, the knights who fought for them, the midwives who birthed them. Their stories, though less sung, are as vital as those of our queens. A reminder that history is not just the tale of the mighty, but of the many. The medieval world was a crucible, forging legends from hardship and hope, its legacy a mirror to our own struggles and dreams. As we gather these threads, from Joanna's deadly charm to the midwife's quiet courage, we see a story that transcends time, a saga of defiance, desire, and survival. Let's step back now, not to end our journey, but to weave these tales together, to reflect on how these queens, revelers, and unsung heroes shaped a world that still echoes in our own, a final orbit through the heart of history. As we gather the threads of the medieval world from the muddy fields, where peasants toiled, to the candlelit chambers where midwives fought for life, we stand at the crossroads of a story that binds queens, revelers, and the unsung in a single vibrant tapestry. The lives of Joanna of Naples, Eleanor of Aquitaine, and Margot of Bourgogne, woven with the chaos of the 12 days of Christmas and the quiet heroism of midwives, reveal a world where defiance, desire, and survival danced in delicate balance, these stories, though centuries old, pulse with a human spirit that feels as alive today as it did in the shadow of medieval castles. We've walked through Joanna's sunlit court, where her charm was a weapon sharper than any blade. Her marriage is a game of power that left rivals trembling and ballads soaring. We've followed Eleanor's audacious path, from the Crusades' dusty trails to Poitiers' poetic halls, where she turned love into a revolution and rebellion into a legacy. We've lingered in Margot's shadow tower, where a fleeting passion cost her everything. Her scandal a reminder that even queens were prisoners of their time. We've danced through the 12 days of Christmas, where Saturnalia's wild roots let peasants mock lords and queens loosen their crowns, if only for a night. We've knelt beside midwives, their hands steady in the face of death, their courage a quiet echo of the queen's boldness. And we've wandered the broader medieval world, where peasants like Thomas, knights like Robert, and the church's towering presence shaped a society as brutal as it was beautiful. Let's pause now, not to close the book, but to reflect on how these lives, so different yet so entwined, crafted a history that still whispers to us today. Joanna's story, with its deadly marriages and unyielding charisma, was a masterclass in survival. Crowned in 1343, she ruled Naples through wars, betrayals, and papal decrees. Her four husbands, each a chapter in a saga that ended in her strangulation in 1382. Her scandals, from the trapdoor bed legend to the suspicious deaths of her spouses, were less about truth and more about power. A queen who refused to bow to a world that demanded her silence. Eleanor, born a century earlier, was a titan who reshaped Europe. Her marriages to Louis VII of France and Henry II of England forging an empire from Scotland to the Pyrenees. Her courtly love movement in Poitiers was a rebellion in verse. Her backing of her son's revolt against Henry a gamble that cost her 16 years of freedom, but not her spirit. Released in 1189, she ruled as regent for Richard the Lionheart, her mind as sharp at 82 as it was at 15. Margot, less fortunate, was a queen undone by desire. Her 1314 affair in the Tour d'Seine a spark that ignited King Philip IV's wrath. Her imprisonment in Chateau Gaillard, where she died in 1315, was a stark reminder that even queens were bound by honor's fragile threads. These women, though divided by time and place, shared a fire, a refusal to be caged by their crowns. Their scandals were not mere gossip but acts of agency, each a challenge to a world that saw women as pawns. The 12 Days of Christmas, with its roots in Roman Saturnalia, was their mirror, a time when the medieval world let its guard down, allowing peasants, knights, and queens to revel in a freedom that was otherwise forbidden. From December 25th to January 6th, villages glowed with bonfires, castles echoed with laughter, and the Lord of Misrule turned order into chaos. Wassailing, mummers' plays, and spiced wine were not just traditions but lifelines, a chance for a society bound by duty to breathe. The church, with its masses and relics, tried to tame this wildness, but the Saturnalia spirit endured, a nod to humanity's need for release. Midwives, too, were part of this world, their hands delivering life in the same villages where carols rang, their courage a quiet defiance that matched the queen's louder rebellions. In smoky rooms, they battled death with herbs and prayers, their work a testament to the strength that thrived in the shadows. The broader medieval world, with its peasants, knights, and priests, was the stage for these stories, a place where faith and fear, beauty and brutality, coexisted. Peasants like Thomas fed the courts of queens, their labor the foundation of Joanna's feasts and Eleanor's empire. Knights like Robert swore oaths that could lead to glory or betrayal, their swords as vital to Margot's downfall as to Eleanor's reign. The church, with its soaring cathedrals and stern priests, was both a guide and a judge, its influence a constant in every life. From the midwife's whispered prayers to Joanna's battles with popes, this world was a crucible, forging legends from hardship and hope. Its stories a bridge to our own time. What makes these tales endure is not just their drama, but their humanity, Joanna's cunning, Eleanor's ambition, Margot's passion, the midwife's grit, the reveler's joy. All reflect the same desires that drive us today. They fought for power, love, and survival in a world that sought to define them. Their victories and failures a mirror to our own struggles. The 12 days of Christmas, with its chaos and community, reminds us that even in the darkest times, humanity finds ways to laugh, to connect, to dream. Midwives, though unsung, were the heartbeat of this world, their hands ensuring the future while queens and knights shaped its present. These stories are not just history, they are a call to look at our own lives to see where we, too, defy the rules, chase our desires, or fight for those we love. The medieval world was no fairy tale. It was a place of mud and blood, of faith and fire. But it was also a place of resilience where every soul, from queen to peasant, left a mark. As we close this journey through the courts of Naples, the halls of Poitiers, the tower by the Seine, and the firelit villages of Christmas, we don't say goodbye to these stories, we carry them forward. Their echoes alive in every choice we make, every dream we chase. History Orbit isn't just a channel, it's a time machine, and we're not done exploring. If these tales of scandal, revelry, and courage lit a spark in you, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment with your favorite moment. Was it Joanna's deadly charm, Eleanor's poetic rebellion, or the midwife's quiet strength? Share this video with a friend who loves history as much as you do, and check out our playlist for more journeys into the past. The medieval world was just one stop. Our next orbit might take us to ancient Rome, the Viking seas, or the courts of distant empires, each with stories as wild and human as these. Stay with us. Keep exploring and let's uncover the past together, because history isn't just written, it's lived, and we're here to live it with you.